On Thursday, March 12, 2026, Iran's newly appointed Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei issued his first address to the nation amid unconfirmed reports that he was injured in an airstrike. The address was a direct warning to the United States and Israel that they will, in his words, pay the price for every attack carried out on Iranian soil. He declared, "The Strait of Hormuz will stay closed." He threatened every American military base in the region, and he announced that Iran has already drawn up plans to open new fronts in this war where the U.S. is, his words, exceptionally vulnerable. This was not a morning speech. This was the first strategic declaration from a regime that the United States tried to decapitate on February 28th and failed. Over the next few minutes, I will break down Mojtaba Khamenei's defiant first address, and you will see exactly what Iran's warning means for the future of this war. And it starts with the Strait of Hormuz. His official statement, translated by the Tasnim news agency, reads, "The strategic leverage of blocking the Strait of Hormuz must absolutely continue to be utilized." 2 days earlier, Trump posted on Truth Social, demanding Iran remove any mines from the waterway immediately, threatening military consequences at a level never seen before. CENTCOM destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels in response. And Mojtaba Khamenei's answer was to get on state television and declare the blockade continues. Those two positions cannot coexist, and one of them will have to break. Maritime traffic through the strait has collapsed by 90%. At least 19 commercial vessels have been attacked since the war began. Around 140 container ships are trapped in the Gulf with nowhere to go. The IRGC Naval Commander Ali Reza Tangsiri declared that any ship entering the strait must obtain Iran's approval or be fired upon his exact words were, "If you have doubts, come closer and test it." And Iran is not just blocking ships, it is mining the water. U.S. intelligence sources confirmed that several dozen naval mines have already been laid. Iran retains 80 to 90% of its small boat and mine-laying fleet with an estimated stockpile of between 2,000 and 6,000 devices. The IRGC has built what analysts are describing as a defensive gauntlet mines, explosive-laden unmanned speedboats and shore-based missile batteries forming a layered kill zone that no commercial vessel can survive without dedicated military escort. And America has acknowledged it is not yet in a position to immediately guarantee escorted passage for civilian shipping through Hormuz. Energy Secretary Chris Wright said it on camera on March 12th. It will happen relatively soon, but it cannot happen right now because all military assets are currently focused on destroying Iran's offensive capabilities. Most people assume the United States controls the Strait of Hormuz. In reality, the most powerful navy on Earth just admitted on live television that it cannot guarantee safe passage through the most important oil corridor on the planet. Before we continue, thanks for tuning in. Your support is what keeps this channel going, and I genuinely appreciate you watching. Please make sure to subscribe and like the video so I can keep bringing you these updates. And drop your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think is winning this war, and what do you think happens next? Now let us look at what this address immediately triggered in global markets. Within hours of the speech, Brent crude crossed $100 a barrel. The Dow dropped 740 points. This happened on the same day that 32 nations released 400 million barrels from emergency reserves, the largest coordinated emergency reserve release in IEA history, with the United States alone committing 172 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And oil still crossed $100, because those emergency reserves cover roughly 1/4 of the actual daily supply gap. The Strait normally moves 15 million barrels of crude per day, plus another 5 million barrels in refined products. That entire volume is now gone. Gulf producers have slashed output by at least 5 million barrels a day because they physically cannot export it. And the president's response to all of that was in his own words that it represents a very small price to pay. Stay with me, because the Strait is only the beginning of what this speech actually laid out. Most people watching Mojtaba Khamenei's address assumed it was a standard wartime rally, a grieving son making promises of defiance from behind a photograph. In reality, this statement contained a specific operational doctrine, a financial warfare framework, and an explicit threat to expand the conflict into theaters where the United States has no established presence and limited experience. The revenge doctrine, he declared that Iran would extract reparations from the enemy. If the United States and Israel refuse, Iran will seize their assets to whatever extent it deems appropriate. If seizure is not possible, Iran will destroy an equivalent amount of enemy property. That is not a slogan delivered for a domestic audience. That is published policy from the office of a Supreme Leader broadcast on state television during an active state of war. He also specifically named the Minab school attack. Iranian officials said at least 150 students were killed when a U.S. strike hit the Shajra girls' school in Minab on February 28th. Reuters and AP have both reported that preliminary U.S. findings and outside investigations point to outdated targeting data as a likely cause, with reporting indicating the school had been clearly identifiable and was located adjacent to a former IRGC site. Mojtaba Khamenei built his entire first address around that strike. He is anchoring his leadership to the blood of those children, and every day that America fails to produce a conclusive public accounting of what happened in Minab, that anchor digs deeper into the global narrative. Now here's the line that matters most. The most consequential passage in the entire speech, confirmed across multiple independent translations. Studies have been conducted regarding the opening of additional fronts, where the enemy possesses very limited experience and would be exceptionally vulnerable. Their activation will proceed if the state of war persists. That is not a vague threat. That is a published planning disclosure from a sitting head of state. Iran has conducted studies, it has identified specific American vulnerabilities, and it is publicly announcing conditional intent to open new theaters of conflict. The phrase where the enemy possesses very limited experience is doing all the work in that sentence. It points directly toward domains where conventional U.S. military dominance does not apply cyber operations, targeting Gulf, financial and energy infrastructure, expansion of healthy campaigns through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden and controls another critical artery of global shipping, activation of militia networks across Iraq and Syria, and potential disruption of undersea communication cables, which carry over 95% of intercontinental data traffic and sit virtually undefended on the ocean floor. He also explicitly named his allies. He said Yemen's armed groups will do their job. He said Iraq wants to help the Islamic Revolution. Hezbollah has already launched its largest rocket attack on Israel since this war began, 200 rockets in a single barrage, followed by coordinated cluster munition strikes on March 11th. Whatever the new fronts look like, Iran has a roadmap, a trigger condition, and an audience that now knows both exist. Meanwhile, the Strait of Hormuz is producing its own strange reality on the water. Iran is blockading the waterway for the entire world, but Iranian tankers are still passing through transponders, switched-off shadow fleet vessels moving crude to Chinese ports, with roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports ending up in China. Iran has effectively weaponized this closure for everyone except itself, and some commercial vessels have even begun broadcasting signals suggesting Chinese commercial links in an attempt to reduce their targeting risk. On March 12th, alone, a U.S.-owned tanker off the coast of Iraq was struck by an explosive-laden unmanned speedboat, killing one crew member and causing heavy structural damage. A second tanker heading toward Basra caught fire after being attacked. A container ship was hit 35 nautical miles north of Jebel Ali near Dubai. Oman evacuated the Mina Al Fahal terminal, which alone handles roughly 1 million barrels per day. Japan, which depends on the strait for 70% of its oil imports, began tapping its national reserves. In parts of Asia, governments are ordering 4-day work weeks to conserve fuel. And consider the human cost that gets buried under the market numbers. 6 civilians dead in the United Arab Emirates, 112 wounded. 2 killed in Saudi Arabia after a projectile struck a residential neighborhood in Al-Kharj. A 29-year-old woman killed by a missile fragment in Manama, Bahrain. A child killed by shrapnel in Kuwait. Jordan targeted by 119 Iranian missiles and drones in a single night. Reuters reported 7 U.S. service members killed in action as of March 11th, with roughly 140 wounded. 2 U.S. fighter jets accidentally shot down by Kuwaiti air defenses in the confusion of overlapping fire, with all 6 aircrew ejecting safely. Now, who is this man, and is he actually in control? Mojtaba Khamenei was not elected. He was not publicly vetted. He never held public office and never ran for any position the Iranian public could vote on. But for years he operated as a backroom power broker inside the Revolutionary Guard with direct access to the intelligence apparatus and the senior military command. His father was killed in the opening strikes. And Iranian and regional reporting indicates other members of his family were also among the dead. Israeli officials confirmed to Axios that Mojtaba was inside the compound when it was hit. He survived, but the extent of his injuries is contradicted by every source available. Iranian state media says light injuries, unconfirmed reports describe a coma. Others describe an amputation. 13 days have now passed, and not a single frame of video or second of audio has emerged proving he is functional and in command. The IRGC pressured the assembly of experts to install him through what members themselves described as an atmosphere of repeated phone calls and limited deliberation. His own statement admits he learned of his appointment by watching state television. That is the origin story of the man now directing Iran's war strategy. The speech itself also directly contradicts Iran's own president. One day earlier, President Masoud Pezeshkian publicly outlined conditions for ending the war, recognition of Iran's rights reparations, and guarantees against future aggression. That is negotiation language. That is an off-ramp being constructed in public. Mojtaba Khamenei's address contained no off-ramp, no conditions, and no framework for any kind of talks. The Supreme Leader and the President of the same country, speaking within 24 hours of each other, are describing two completely different wars. 13 days of American and Israeli airstrikes, over 5,500 targets hit, more than 60 Iranian naval vessels destroyed, including all 4 Soleimani-class warships and at least 1 submarine. B-2 stealth bombers hitting ballistic missile production sites. AI-assisted targeting that the CENTCOM commander described as achieving lethal effects in entirely new ways. Nuclear facilities reportedly struck. 5 oil installations around Tehran ablaze with smoke thick enough for the World Health Organization to issue warnings about toxic rainfall across the region. Trump said there's nothing left to target. The IRGC says it has enough ordnance for 6 continuous months of operations, and that only first and second generation missiles have been used so far, with advanced long-range systems still to come. The man whose father, mother, wife, and daughter were pulled from rubble 13 days ago, whose government was supposed to collapse, whose regime was supposed to fracture under the weight of the most intensive American air campaign of the 21st century, just issued a written address that moved global markets, promised new war fronts, declared the strait permanently closed, threatened American bases across 10 countries, and demanded financial reparations from the most powerful military alliance on Earth. And he did all of it without showing his face. Neither side's objectives have survived contact with reality. CENTCOM leveled Iran's conventional military capacity that is verified and documented. But the strait remains closed. The oil remains stranded. The mines remain in the water. The missiles are still flying. And a supreme leader who may not be able to stand just told the world that the revenge file will never close. The United States achieved the most devastating air campaign of the 21st century. Iran achieved $100 oil without firing a single bullet at a wellhead. Those two realities do not cancel each other out. They coexist. And that coexistence is the entire strategic crisis that neither government has addressed, let alone resolved. Share this with everyone you know right now. Mojtaba Khamenei issued his first address from behind a photograph unseen, unheard, possibly incapacitated. Oil closed above $100 despite the largest emergency reserve release in IEA history. U.S. officials acknowledged civilian escorts through Hormuz were not yet immediately available. Western officials confirmed Iran had deployed mines across the waterway. Reuters reported at least 16 civilian ships attacked, while dozens more were forced to anchor or avoid the strait entirely. A girls' school struck in Minab is now the founding symbol of a new Supreme Leader's rule. And the only question that determines what happens next is one that no official on any side has answered. When one country controls the sky and the other controls the choke point, who runs out of leverage first? Thanks for watching. I really appreciate your support. Join the discussion in the comments below. Who do you think is winning this war? Where do you think the conflict heads next? Subscribe and like the video if you want to stay updated, and click the video on screen to see another one. I will see you soon.